This is the American Standard In-Santo toilet, or at least the last generation of the In-Santo, introduced sometime around the early 1970s and was made up until 2009. This generation seemed to have had very minimal changes. It's looked like this throughout most of its lifespan for this generation. However, it's obviously gone through some water changes, going from a 4 to 5 gallon toilet to a 3.5 gallon toilet, as seen here. Let's take a look at this generation and see what it has to offer for its final farewell. As you can tell, this is a back spud version, but the overall design is not any different from the top spud version. It's very standard, honestly. Trapway opening is a standard circle or oval, whatever you want to call it, but it's a circular opening. And it has concealed siphon jets. Now let's have a look at flush. As you can see, the flush is pretty standard for a blowout toilet, so not much needs to be said. The pulling factor seems to be fairly well for this. Having some front jets help out with the pulling factor. I don't ever know de-shredding all that much, although it could be somewhat of a rare occurrence though. But compared to some others, it's not too bad. Performance, on the other hand, is just okay. I noticed that the performance took a little bit of a hit compared to the prior generations, which seemed to perform well. This, on the other hand, is just okay. Meaning that this can occasionally clog every now and then, but thankfully not as common as some other fixtures. But it is a little bit disappointing comparing it to some prior generations of the In-Santo. Now let's have a look at ball runs. It does have straight down jets, unfortunately, since this is a blowout. But compared to others, the ball runs isn't completely terrible, but it definitely could be a lot better. There are some areas that seem to be kind of missed in the straight down pointing jets, meaning that the ball runs is a little bit lacking, which really isn't shocking. And that is the American Standard In-Santo, the final generation to end off the In-Santo lineup. It's an interesting end off, and there could be some aspects that could have been better, but overall this is a fairly cool toilet that's pretty reliable for what it is, but some qualities could have been improved upon. But let's grade it. The overall design isn't really much to talk about, but at least it doesn't look cheap, but outside of that, there's really not much to say here. I give it a 5. The quality control is not too bad on these, and they seem to function fairly well and seem to have very little problems. Maybe outside of ball runs, which is more of a rim jet problem and some slight performance issues. Outside of that, the quality control is not bad at all, and I have to give it a 7. This is a very consistently designed toilet with very few defects. I wouldn't say entirely perfect, as I could see some of these being slightly defective in terms of the design. Outside of that, I give it a 9. The trapway is pretty standard for a blowout and a pretty good size too. I give it a 6. The flush really isn't anything too special outside the funny choppy noises that the flush makes. I give it a 6. It's alright. The pulling factor is not bad at all. These things pull things down consistently with very little problems and with very little shredding problem. Maybe outside of weak and short flushes. I give it a 7. The performance, on the other hand, is just okay. It's a little bit lacking compared to some other toilets out there, and considering the trapway size, it is a bit disappointing, but generally speaking, if this thing ever really clogs, it's mostly due to the trapway opening. Considering that, I'm giving it a 6. The ball rinse is not the greatest, and this mostly has to do with the angled down rim jets, not really a quality control issue or a bowl design issue. It's mostly the angled down rim jets that kind of ruin it. If this was angled, it would definitely be a lot better, but as it is, it gets a 5. Outside of some slight performance issues, which is not as common as you might think, the survivability on these things are pretty decent. I think it lasts a pretty good long time. I get the survivability a 7. Let's talk about the overall value of this toilet. In comparison to some other blowout toilets and even some previous generations of In-Santos, I definitely think this generation of In-Santo is interesting to say the least. There are some redeeming factors like the pulling factor and a pretty decent survivability. There are some other factors that do drag it down like the bow runs, and even the performance is a little bit questionable at some points. Outside of that though, it's not too bad of a toilet, but in comparison to some other blowout toilets or even some previous generations of In-Santos, it's a little bit lacking, but far from the worst thing ever. I give the value a 6 overall. The final score of the final generation American Standard In-Santo toilet is a 64 out of 100. This is an interesting way to send off the In-Santo lineup of toilets. While there are some drawbacks of this toilet, it does have some interesting quirks about it that I do like about it. It's far from the best blowout toilet ever, but at the end of the day, it's not too bad of a toilet.